Hey, spoilers ahead. My two favourite interactive story games are Until Dawn and The Wolf Among Us. Life is Strange comes in third.
David, kick that table!
Yes, sir!
Where Until Dawn was a lightning in a bottle moment released by a relatively unknown studio during a resurgence of interest in the genre, Wolf Among Us was burdened with the unenviable task of being a sophomore project set to follow up the highly acclaimed first season of Telltale's Walking Dead. If you weren't there for Telltale's Walking Dead, then it's hard to describe just how inescapable it was. The TV show of the same name was on its third season and people still cared about it. Zombie media as a whole was huge, and the popularity of Let's Players on YouTube was reaching its zenith, with PewDiePie being one of the fastest growing channels and less than a year away from becoming the biggest on the platform. The Walking Dead game was extremely popular. It won loads of awards, sold millions of copies, gripped the booming genre of Let's Plays by the sack, dominated early 2010s conventions unlike anything since, save for maybe Deadpool, Critical Role or Baldur's Gate, and set a high bar for Telltale that honestly they basically never hit again kind of like Until Dawn for Supermassive. However, unlike Supermassive dropping the absolute midfest that was Man and Medan, Telltale would find their Pinkerton in a follow-up game that in many ways was just as good, if not better, than their flagship series. Yeah, that was a Weezer reference. I Weezered you. The rights to develop Robert Kirkman's Walking Dead were acquired by Telltale alongside the rights to adapt Bill Willingham's Fables comics, and shortly after the release of The Walking Dead, Telltale got to work on adapting these. Fables is a series about fairy tale creatures living a hidden existence in our world, somewhere between World of Darkness and Shrek. Following being kicked out of their lands by an evil being called the Adversary, Fables, which is a term for fairy tale creatures, have been living secretly in America, and everywhere else, but mostly in America. They use magical glamours to appear more human, and non-compliant animal-looking fables like toads or ogres are sent to an upstate labour camp called The Farm, where they're out of sight of regular people, who the fables called mundanes or mundies. Where Telltale's Walking Dead has a lot of divergence from the source material, including a whole new cast of characters, The Wolf Among Us follows the comics character Bigby Wolf, who is the big bad wolf, and other pre-established figures. This presents new challenges to the studio as they have to allow for divergence in player choice, all in keeping with the believable canon of Bigby as a character. This is exacerbated by the fact that Bigby is kind of the worst guy ever. He's an alcoholic, balding, Israel-loving cop who routinely resorts to brutality and arrests people for no reason, with little to no evidence. He works for a government that has almost no real authority and is entirely under the thumb of self-interested oligarchs, and his main job is to track down ugly people and send them to the gulag. Despite all of this, Telltale manages to make him likeable and believable, honestly more so than in the source material. Much like Geralt of Rivia in the Witcher games, Bigby is both flexible to player decisions and consistent in personality traits, quirks, and characterization. It's a difficult balance that many games do not pull off. On top of this, the game takes place around 20 years before the comics, so the studio are free to play around with the setting and characters prior to the establishment of the status quo. So new players don't need to do any homework, and fans of the series can affect change in the setting and see how it developed into what they know. In fact, the game even allows players to set new legal precedent that is presumably followed into the future, but I'm getting massively ahead of myself. It's a lot more than just Bigby that makes The Wolf Among Us the sophomore smash it is, so let's take a look at the game from start to finish and look at what makes it so special, and why we're also hyped for this sequel that's probably never coming out. Massive thank you to the channel members, and if you're new around here, maybe subscribe, maybe don't. I'm not your boss. Awesome, let's go.
You're not as bad as everyone says you are.
The Wolf Among Us is a classic whodunit murder mystery game, a style that remains relatively untouched in the interactive movie genre outside of David Cage's near constant attempts at it, and I guess LA Noire if we stretch the definition a little bit. Honestly, this style lends itself so well to this format that I'm really surprised we don't see more of these. The minimalist gameplay lends itself well to slow-paced clue collection, broken up with occasional bursts of action. This game has phenomenal pacing throughout. It also looks beautiful. I love the stylized noir comic book style that Telltale uses for this. We open with Bigby investigating a domestic disturbance after being called by Mr. Toad. Headed into an apartment, he finds the woodsman from the story of Red Riding Hood hitting a working girl who we later learn is called Faith.
A working girl?
A working girl? I'm a working... Oh.
Bigby and the woodsman get into a fight before Bigby and Faith leave the woodsman beaten up on the side of the road, and Faith promises to meet Bigby to give a statement after heading back to inform her boss of the night's events. Bigby heads home, has a conversation with a pig named Colin who keeps crashing his place, before an urgent knock at the door from Snow White leads to him following her to find Faith's severed head outside of his apartment. Longtime viewers will know I absolutely love tightly written game introductions, and this is one of the best out there. On top of tutorializing all the basic gameplay concepts, it acts as a great introduction to the setting for quite a few reasons. Toad and Junior give us a good look at public perception of Bigby whilst also filling the player in on the situation in a believable manner. Colin and the Woodsman also showcase just how hated Bigby is by the wider population. The player almost immediately gets a feel for how Bigby is treated and gets to decide quickly how they want to play him. Do they want to lean into being more aggressive, almost animalistic, or do they want to play him as a by-the-book rule follower? Now, this isn't a strict dichotomy. The game forces Bigby into big action set pieces where he goes full dog mode several times throughout the story, which will make it impossible to play a completely reformed, entirely pacifistic version of the character, but you still have quite a lot of variation in choosing how you want to present yourself to the Fable community and how much you want to indulge your animal side. Understanding you can play Bigby in various ways this early in the game is crucial to getting the most enjoyment out of the story, because this is the main variant that will determine the uniqueness of your playthrough. Whilst yes, this game is built on diverging paths, the murder mystery still largely plays out the same no matter what you choose. The major impact of choices in The Wolf Among Us is allowing you to set Bigby's arc, rather than to delineate the story. This game is about stories and how they inform us, about change and how hard it can be to meaningfully convince people that you are different than how you were. This isn't just an urban fantasy subversion of fairy tales where it goes, haha, look, the big bad wolf is the good guy. This is a continuation of these fairy tales, where the characters have had hundreds of years being defined by things they did in the distant past. Some of them change, and some of them don't. This is most evident through Bigby. You don't make choices for the story as much as you make choices for his development. The tutorial does a great job of showcasing this narrative concept, especially with the Woodsman and Bigby, both of whom were once on opposite sides of the good guy, bad guy narrative framing. This is something that massively gets to the Woodsman, who wants to exist in a static story wherein he's always a hero without doing any work, whilst Bigby is making an effort to better himself. The dichotomy here informs the player of the thematic underpinning of this entire game. These characters are haunted by their own narratives, and as the game goes on, this is evident for almost every major player in the plot. On top of this, the introduction gives the player not just an instigating event of the murder mystery being Faith's murder, it also allows the player to briefly get to know Faith, fostering a personal reason to want to investigate, and an obvious red herring suspect in the Woodsman, who repeatedly threatened to kill Faith and whose axe could easily be used for the decapitation. So this is a brilliant tutorial that informs the player of the setting, sets thematic groundwork, invests them in the mystery, and runs them through literally every aspect of gameplay, from the open investigative sections to the combat QTEs to the dialogue choices. This isn't perfect, dialogue doesn't always line up. Bigby makes comments about bitch being a word he is said not to say, even if he never said that.
Hey, what did I say about that word?
But these small quirks can be overlooked and honestly are just minor nitpicks from me. Overall, it's a great introduction. After finding Faith's head, the player gets to work investigating, meeting acting Mayor Ichabod Crane, who is immediately set up as the second most annoying and pathetic guy ever, just after myself. After this, the player learns more about Faith, who is based on the story of Donkey Skin. Players familiar with this story get some foreshadowing into Faith's arc and the reason for her murder. In the original story, Donkey Skin is a princess who hides from her incestuous father in the hide of a donkey, escaping an oppressive hierarchy through duplicity and stealth, something that Faith attempts again leading up to her murder, but more on that later. Bigby gets information on Faith's husband Lawrence before getting a call from Toad about another disturbance, and the player gets their first major choice in the game, to go to Toad's or to Prince Lawrence's house. Now, you end up going to both regardless, and Toad's house is the worst option as there are no real consequences for going there last. Not all choices are created equal, I suppose. At Lawrence's house, the player finds Lawrence close to death after attempting to take himself out. If you go there first, you can potentially save him and keep him alive for the rest of the game. You also get more information on a potential suspect as he name drops someone called Georgie. At Toad's, you find out that Toad and his son are being harassed by the Tweedles, Dumb and Dee. Toad's house is a brilliant set piece for characterizing Bigby, as you can either find all of the clues present and convince Toad to give you the truth through clever wordplay and catching him in lies, or you can just threaten him and skip most of the section, which is effective but damages his perception of you, letting the player sink more into the big bad wolf role. This is a major strength of The Wolf Among Us. You don't just determine Bigby's character through dialogue choices, there are several opportunities for you to change how you play him through all facets of gameplay. Irrespective of prior choice, Bigby ends up at a bar called the Trip Trap looking for the Woodsman, but with the Tweedles also clearly established as potential suspects. Here he gets into a fight with a character called Grendel, where he can potentially rip his arm off, a reference to Beowulf, before getting a choice between arresting Tweedledee or the Woodsman. The Grendel arm thing isn't the only little reference to characters' original stories, the game is peppered with them. It's not overbearing, it's quite endearing in fact. The writers clearly loved a lot of these folk stories. I'm not going to mention every single little one, but drop your favourites down below if you want to geek out about fairy tales. Finally, when taking his chosen suspect, Bigby sees police outside the Woodland apartment and tension builds as you approach the cliffhanger of episode 1, being the discovery of Snow White's head. This is such a tightly written episode. It establishes motives, suspects, and allows the player to build relationships with the victims before ending on a horrifying cliffhanger. However, it doesn't give away too much. It keeps the player in the dark enough to foster intrigue and bring them back for episode 2. Episode 1 of The Wolf Among Us is one of the most cohesive introductions to a game I've ever seen, doing everything it needs to do and nothing more. It would be perfect were it not for the few slight hiccups with dialogue trees not always matching up. This game works on 2 narrative fronts already, and these fronts being explored more as the chapters go on is what makes the bedrock of this title so solid. It's both a compelling murder mystery and a study of change in characters who feel constrained to their own folklore. Do you bother trying to change when everybody already hates you? This is the central question that propels the more personal story of The Wolf Among Us that underpins the more grand conspiratorial mystery. When you've already done irreparable harm and everybody fears you, how can you be accepted as their protector and saviour? The player gets to answer this question through how they characterise Bigby even at this early stage, and this will only continue into episode 2.
Snow White is dead. One of us. And you're going to let this ignorant shit walk out of here in one piece.
Like any good serialised story, The Wolf Among Us has central themes explored in each episode alongside the overarching mystery. The best series have both recurrent plot beats and tightly written individual stories, and this is no exception. Episode 2 is all about love and lust and the things we do for both.
The things I do for love.
At the start of episode 2, after a short segment of Bigby being interrogated by Mundy cops, you get to question your choice of suspect alongside Bluebeard, who I want to talk about for a second. Bluebeard is such an interesting character in both the Fables comics and The Wolf Among Us. Bluebeard's very existence in this game showcases exactly why everyone is unwilling to cooperate with the Fabletown government, and he helps to add more of a moral grey zone to the villains who harp on about corruption, because Bluebeard is ridiculously corrupt.
Corruption is not bad. Corruption is only bad if I'm not involved. Yes. But if I'm part of that corruption, I'll defend it.
Bluebeard is an oligarch who operates with almost total immunity within the Fable community. In the comics, he almost forces a woman who doesn't even like him to marry him through financial contracts. He gets basically whatever he wants through his immense wealth. Here he shows up to torture an unconvicted suspect almost purely for his own enjoyment, going as far as to push the town sheriff out of the way and get involved himself if he doesn't deem their action violent enough. Bluebeard finances the government, so he feels he should have final say in all official discussions.
I don't care who killed the prostitutes. If Crane was helping himself to the community coffers, it means his hand was in my pocket, and you just let him go!
Throughout the game, this will become more pronounced. His influence on the investigation will only grow. Ichabod Crane, the acting mayor, is completely sidelined and straight up bullied by Bluebeard, showcasing just how completely mismanaged the government is. Crane being easily bullied by influential people also foreshadows the greater story and his role within it. This makes players who try to play Bigby as a token rule-following good guy conflicted by showing that the person who helps make the rules is sociopathic. On top of this, you now have 2 facets of a government-aligned Bigby being even more aligned with Bluebeard or Crane, both of whom are the worst. Bluebeard adds moral complexity to every side just by existing. On top of that, he has a fun personality and a nice voice.
Oh no, he's hot!
Interrogating the woodsman will reveal that he beat Faith because she didn't comp him, which his usual girl, Lily, does. Interrogating Dee doesn't teach you much of anything. Either way, following the interrogation, the room is entered by Snow White, revealing that she is alive. Major plot twist. Unless you've read the comics. Turns out the murdered girl was simply someone glamoured to look like Snow White. Not just anyone, Lily, the sister of the owner of the Trip Trap, Holly, a troll who was working for the same guy as Faith. You have a discussion with Holly which showcases the theme of love through a familial lens, with Bigby being able to promise Holly that she will get her sister's body. A well-intentioned promise, but one you actually can't deliver on. The best thing to do here isn't to make empty promises, a lesson that Bigby and Snow have to learn. During this discussion, Bigby learns that Lily and Faith worked for a man called Georgie, who you might have already heard about if you interrogated Lawrence. A lot of this game's choices are clever like this. Later dialogue can either be grand revelations or confirmations of previously held suspicions, depending on which clues you've managed to find. Bigby heads down to Georgie's establishment, the Pudding and Pie, and meets a girl called Vivian who works there before meeting with the owner himself. Georgie is a cynical dirtbag who preys on the downtrodden and the lost in the hearts of men. He intrinsically believes the worst of everyone, as is shown when he aggravates Bigby, calls him a thug, and attempts to get him to attack him numerous times. Much like in Toad's apartment, Bigby can either play by the rules and take longer to get to the bottom of things, or act aggressively for faster results at the cost of reputation. However, in this instance, Georgie wants the worst outcome. He wants to vindicate his beliefs in people, and as a wealthy Fable with connections, he can easily have Bigby harshly punished if he doesn't follow proper procedures. The best case scenario for Georgie is to prey on Bigby's love of violence. Regardless, Bigby speaks with one of the girls, who reveals that she was once called the Little Mermaid, but now goes by Narissa, and books an appointment with her so that he can be taken to the usual place where the girls take their clients. Here he meets with Beauty, who we briefly met in episode 1, who reveals that she has been working the desk here for extra money as her and her husband Beast are broke. Beast arrives shortly after and starts a fight with Bigby, believing him to be cheating with Beauty. Bigby wins the fight and the pair go crashing through a door to reveal a murder scene. Here, Bigby finds out that Lily's killer was obsessed with Snow White, acting out sexual fantasies with the glamoured Lily based on the Snow White myth. The episode ends with Bigby finding a photograph revealing that the culprit was none other than Ichabod Crane, who we see smash the magic mirror before fleeing. As stated previously, this episode is really tightly written. It continues the story at a rapid pace, maintaining intrigue whilst exploring the central themes and the theme unique to this episode being love and lust. In the 3 major set pieces of this episode, the theme is explored. First, Bigby and Snow's blossoming relationship is explored following the interrogation. Then Georgie's weaponizing of emotion to run his club, and Holly's complicated love for her sister at the pudding and pie. Then we get to see Beauty and Beast's failing relationship, and finally Crane's unhealthy obsession that got him entangled with the wider conspiracy. It's the best and worst of that most tender emotion all laid bare in a single episode. Across this episode, we see numerous interpretations of the things people do for their loved ones in both major and minor ways, and this theme propels the plot and allows the game to turn inwards to a more character-driven plot than the first episode. This theme of love helps to endear us to this world and show characters laid bare and at their most emotional, before shifting the tone again an episode later to something a lot more visceral.
Look, it's recently come under our attention that you're, how shall I put this, attempting to claim what is the personal property of the Crooked Man.
Episode 3 is all about anger, not just in Bigby but also in Snow. We see a dimension to her character that wasn't present before. She can be just as ruthless as the other government-aligned Fables when she needs to be. This episode ends with the lowest point in the story, and Bigby is the most violent he's been yet, potentially killing another Fable if a player is choosing to lean into this. This episode opens on a low point with Lily's funeral, which a player can interrupt if they're a bad person, or they can wait for Snow's speech to finish before telling her about Crane. Again, we're able to control Bigby through gameplay rather than dialogue choices. Regardless of choice, the Tweedles crash the funeral, and no matter if Bigby aligns with them or not, they'll shoot into the crowd and injure Gren, Holly, and Bigby. In this episode, it's very rare that you're able to talk your way out of conflict. From here, Snow and Bigby return to the business office and realise Crane has broken the mirror, so they have to find him without it. Snow is furious at Crane in this episode, and it makes sense just in general to be honest, but especially when you consider her backstory as is shown in the Fables comics, being left by a lecherous conman of a Prince Charming, forever tainting her view of romance and relationships. Her life so far has been defined by lustful and pathetic men, and it's clearly driving her down a path of female rage. Following a conversation with Bluebeard, who is now trying to fill the power vacuum left with Crane's departure, the player is given a choice between 3 leads to investigate: the Trip Trap, the Tweedle's office, or Crane's apartment. This decision, like before, is only which area you go to first. Despite there being a time limit, you will always visit all 3. However, there is a correct order to go if you want to meet every single character. The playthrough I did for the footage in this video was the first time I ever actually met Flycatcher here, so I've played this game at least 5 times and made bad choices every time, seemingly. So we'll go through things in the optimal order and add a note here that this was kind of frustrating and a bizarre dev choice. There shouldn't really be a right and wrong order to things in a game like this, although there is some logic to mapping out the correct route, and you could argue that a player should be rewarded for making practical decisions rather than just being rewarded no matter what. You start by investigating Crane's apartment. It's literally right upstairs, so it takes almost no time to get there from the business office. Here you find more evidence of him being a general scumbag, as well as him embezzling Fabletown funds. You also find Jack, as in Jack and the Beanstalk, who is robbing Crane. In speaking with him, you learn that Crane was seeing a witch called Auntie Greenleaf. If Bigby doesn't go here first, then Bluebeard investigates and burns down evidence. Next you go to the Tweedle's office and meet the janitor Flycatcher, who you can offer a job back at the Woodlands now that Crane is gone. There isn't any more evidence here, but going to Crane's office first means that Bluebeard goes here and attacks Flycatcher, further showcasing just how brutal Bluebeard is and how downtrodden the poorest in society are. Finally, you investigate the Trip Trap, finding some more woodsman lore about how he was seeing both the Troll Sisters and speaking with a very out-of-it Holly before finding the address of the witch. You can do these things in any order, but to get the most character interactions, miss absolutely no potential dialogue, and have the best overall view of the mystery, you have to do it this way. From here, Bigby and Snow find the home of Auntie Greenleaf, who they realise is disguising herself as a child. This is where Snow shows her darker side, as she wants to burn down the witch's tree, the source of her magic, completely shutting down this woman's livelihood, destroying an item of great sentimental value to her, and also making it harder for poor Fables to get glamours. Snow is downright vengeful this episode. She wants to completely destroy the lives of anyone who wrongs her, rather than make pragmatic decisions. Bigby can step in here, going as far as to get Auntie Greenleaf a job at the business office, increasing access to glamours, but Snow always wants to burn down the tree and will be angry if you don't side with her. Following a lead from Greenleaf, the pair find Crane trying to use a defunct magic ring to break a magical silence on the girls at the Pudding and Pie, to no effect.
Come on, please. Tell me who killed her.
My lips are sealed.
From here, it seems that Snow and Bigby have caught their guy, though Snow doubts that he directly committed the murders. However, on the way out, the pair are stopped by employees of a figure called the Crooked Man, the Tweedles, and Bloody Mary, who is an outright sadist who really drives the themes of this episode home. Bigby and Snow can be violent and vicious and stoke fear in the populace, but they will never be able to beat Bloody Mary at this. She is an ineffable force of pure malice. Here a fight breaks out which you always lose, leading to Crane being taken away. However, in the scuffle, Bigby can kill Tweedledee. Again, this is more a characterization choice than the story one. The death of Dee changes very little in the later chapters. His character falls by the wayside following this if he remains alive. But this choice, as of all the important ones, is more about how you want to play Bigby. Snow is also present here, and she can see just how brutal Bigby can be, with him potentially brutally killing another Fable right in front of her. Killing Dee makes Snow's harsh 180 into wanting to completely follow every single letter of the law in the next episode more understandable. Snow and Bigby are, in many ways, at their absolute worst in this episode. Both are driven more by a sense of vengeance than justice, operating in the same hateful framework as characters like Bluebeard, who also plays a role in this investigation now. One episode ago, Snow was talking about wanting to help all the poor Fables, but now she wants to burn their tree and cut their livelihoods off. Bigby can be presenting himself as the poster child for reform, but he can still outright kill one of his enemies in front of their brother. Everyone is corrupt. The heroes and villains are no longer fairy tale characters. They exist in a world of nuance and perspective, and they can't solve every issue by relentlessly attacking a bad guy. There needs to be better conditions for Fables across the board, and it was the blind naivety of those in power that allowed people like the Crooked Man to rise to prominence. It was the embezzling of people like Crane that diverted funds away from people who needed it. Crane says that the power of his position changes people, causes them to become worse and sacrifice their morals. And whilst Bigby and Snow can insist they are better, if they continue down the path they did in this episode, then that's not the case. Beating the villain only creates the conditions for another if the underlying systemic injustice isn't tackled and a fairer society created. With the power vacuum left by Crane, there are numerous parties vying to fill it. Bigby and Snow, Bluebeard, and the Crooked Man. However, at this current stage, none of these parties are any good for Fabletown. All of them are self-motivated and filled with too much anger to effectively govern. So, in episode 4, Bigby and Snow need to take a step back, think about things, and be better.
We're trying to catch a murderer, and they're over there bickering about bureaucracy.
The penultimate episode is one of reform, the central theme being power and how to wield it fairly. We open with Bigby markedly traumatized, dreaming of Bloody Mary haunting him with a woodsman axe, before waking up to find Dr. Swinehart tending to his wounds as Colin and Snow watch on. Snow kickstarts the central discussion of this chapter, which is how much will following the law to the letter actually improve lives. Sure, it will ensure less corruption, but it also means Bigby has to send characters we've come to know like Colin, Toad, and TJ to the farm. Taking a call from Beauty following a discussion with Nerissa where we learn that the magic item that stops the girls from talking about the crimes are the ribbons around their necks, Bigby is tipped off to two potential leads, being the Jersey Devil's pawn shop and a butcher shop that Bloody Mary comes into sometimes. There isn't too much diversion and choice here, as always you go to both, but there are minor changes depending on the path. Regardless of choice, the missing piece of the magic mirror is always found in the second location. If you go to the butcher shop first, you get a list of Crooked Man's clients. If you go to the pawn shop first, you get some added dialogue with Jack and Toad. Either way, Bigby finds out the Crooked Man has been enslaving people and making them make illegal magical items, and gets into a fight with the Jersey Devil alongside the Woodsman, before finding out that the Crooked Man's door moves around magically, so it's never in the same place. Taking this information and the missing magic mirror piece back to the business office, the player is confronted with Toad and Bluebeard's issues with Snow's newfound commitment to law and order. Especially Toad, who the player has the option to send to the farm, give money, or try to get Snow to leave alone. If the player went to Jersey's first, the player can see that Toad is selling Faith's coat to try and get money for a glamour too. Toad is interesting here because he and TJ are kind of dark patches on Snow's commitment to upholding the law. Both of them are at risk of being evicted and sent out to the farm, which the player never sees, so it's this daunting prison looming just out of frame. However, the player can give Toad reminders to follow the law, they can give him money, and no matter what you do, he never actually bothers to get a glamour and always goes to the farm at the end of the game. Colin can be bailed out by Bigby, but Toad always has himself and his son sent to the farm. When initially drafting this script, I was thinking, why can't we just give Toad and TJ glamours if we hire Auntie Greenleaf? But when reviewing every Toad interaction, I'm pretty sure he just wouldn't take it or would sell it off or something. And just giving out glamours does massively undermine the livelihoods of witches who say that magic is costly. Toad is interesting because he can be interpreted as either a complete idiot who doesn't even try to prevent his fate or respect any form of authority, or a victim of an unfair legal system which disproportionately targets people like him. Generally, I lean towards the first interpretation, as it fits well with the original Wind in the Willows Toad of Toad Hall, who also routinely ends up in prison for his thrill-seeking. I get that this game wants to show that we need to create social safety nets to create a fair society, but Toad is repeatedly refusing help for seemingly no reason. I think this just adds another layer of believability to the world, to be honest. Following this interaction, where Snow establishes herself as the new power in Fabletown and reaffirms her commitment to doing things properly, Bigby can use the magic mirror to see Crane being sent to Paris before finding the Crooked Man's door and rushing over there. The chapter ends with Bigby coming face to face with the Crooked Man and his cronies, but also Tiny Tim, who has been hired by the Crooked Man and given an income that he could not otherwise get, showing a bit more nuance to the situation. The Crooked Man is a criminal, no doubt, and it's clear he only gives out more benevolent jobs to down-on-their-luck Fables to create a veneer of respectability. But he is, in many respects, much more efficient than the government at the business office in terms of actually changing the lives of the poorest in society.
So it's just that easy.
Maybe not, but you don't want to be a part of this.
A lot of us depend on him. Some of us never get to the front of the line at the business office. But he's there. We need you, but we need him too.
This brings the point of this episode into focus, which is showcasing the failings of Crane, the failings of Snow and Bigby, and how, even if they arrest the Crooked Man, without meaningful change, someone just like him will rise up to fill the power vacuum, because the most downtrodden don't have any other recourse. The player chooses the first line of dialogue to the Crooked Man, who offers Bigby a seat, and then the episode ends.
There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He brought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house.
Whilst the Crooked Man has been a shady villain hinted at for every prior episode, the finale serves largely to sell a player on him as a believable villain, and much of the chapter is concerned with exactly what makes someone like him, and just what can be done to ensure others won't follow his example. This episode is all about justice, and the player is given the game's greatest choice, being exactly how they want to enact it. The Crooked Man speaks with Bigby and promises that he didn't kill the girls, it was all a misunderstanding. The player has a chance to put together the mystery here, being congratulated by the Crooked Man for guessing correctly who the murderer was. Faith and Lily were murdered by... drumroll please... Georgie, who claims he did it on the Crooked Man's orders, a claim which the Crooked Man denies, obviously. Violence breaks out, leading to Georgie getting stabbed by Bigby before he and Vivian escape, and Bloody Mary arrives to escape with the Crooked Man. There's a little car chase segment here, and the player chooses which car they want to jump on. Unfortunately, this is another one of those choices where there is a correct option. Chasing Bloody Mary and the Crooked Man just gets Bigby thrown off the car and knocked out before he goes to the pudding and pie, whilst jumping onto Georgie's car gets you there faster and lets you see more dialogue. Regardless, Georgie is dying, and he reveals that the ribbons around the girl's necks are what stopped them from talking about confidential stuff. The ribbons are made from Vivian's ribbon, and the curse is broken as she takes off hers and her head falls off like the murdered girl's. Georgie then gives Bigby the Crooked Man's location, and the player has a choice to either leave Georgie to bleed out or to kill him. At the steelworks where the Crooked Man is hiding out, Bigby fights with Bloody Mary and kills her before either killing the Crooked Man or bringing him in for trial, which is what Snow wanted. He also turns into a big wolf and he huffs and puffs. From here, there's a trial where the player is judged for their choices, which is a fun recap of everything up to this point, and puts into perspective just how much effort the player has made to showcase a commitment to change or just how brutal they've been. Eventually, Nerissa shows up and says that she saw the Crooked Man order the girls' deaths. Vivian taking off her ribbon has broken her curse. Bigby gets the final say in what to do with the Crooked Man. You either turn him into a crow and imprison him, rip his head off, or throw him down the witching well. From here, the game has an epilogue where we see a large number of Fables seen throughout the game in Crooked Man establishments waiting outside the business office where Snow is clearly overworked. Bigby is shut down by her and we see Bluebeard skipping the line. Outside, Flycatcher is driving Toad and TJ to the farm, TJ in tears. So yeah, all Fables are now being seen by the business office and the Crooked Man's empire has crumbled, but a lot of the old issues are still seemingly apparent. Corruption is implied and many of the most dejected Fables are still at the back of a huge queue. Some of them might never see the front of it. Outside, Bigby meets Nerissa, who reveals after some conversation that she lied and she didn't witness the Crooked Man telling Georgie to kill the girls. She made up a story to tell at the trial to have someone she viewed as evil killed, again showcasing corruption and mishandling of justice within the Fable community. Nerissa also reveals why the girls died, which was that they tried to blackmail Crane with the photographs of him and Lily to get enough money to leave the pudding and pie. She was the one who put the heads outside of Bigby's apartment and has been subtly guiding him the entire investigation to get the outcome she wanted. Finally, she leaves him with the line,
You're not as bad as everyone says you are.
I need to tell you something.
I have to tell you something.
I feel like we've met before.
You're trying to place me. You like my ribbon? Do you like it?
Faith wore one too. Would hide her beauty so she could escape his kingdom.
They used to call me the Little Mermaid.
Dr. Swinehart ever get back to you about
He
Faith?
said he wanted to run more tests. I hope you find what you're looking for.
This last plot twist is brilliant as it fundamentally challenges everything you've believed up to this point. There was foreshadowing with her repeating some dialogue unique to Faith throughout, but this is outright confirmation that the first person Bigby met at the start of the game wasn't Faith, it was Nerissa. The entire thing has been, in part, orchestrated by her, to point Bigby in the direction of corruption she wanted to stamp out in an act of revenge against the Crooked Man. A new order has been built on a lie. The Crooked Man was disgusting and cruel, but he might not have been guilty of the crime he was sentenced to death for. Justice was brought about by duplicity and vengeance, and now the system seems shakier than ever. Yes, Bigby has undermined a criminal organisation, but in the end very little has been done other than shift slightly more power to the government. It's only a matter of time until another Crooked Man appears in Fabletown, and Bigby is now tasked with the near impossible job of having to try and prevent that. Bigby can either chase after Nerissa, or let her go, and the credits roll. In this episode, a player is confronted with their choices, bringing the central connective theme of change to a head. Simultaneously, the player is questioned on if they actually saw justice carried out, and how well they think Fabletown is equipped to deal with a similar situation arising. How long until another Crooked Man?
You didn't look good last night. I wasn't sure you'd be, around.
Well, let's just say I've been better.
Huff and puffs. Not many people smoke those. Thanks.
can start talking.
So, what makes this game so great? Why am I hyping it up so much? Well, as I stated repeatedly throughout the video, it's just really concise writing. Each episode advances the wider plot in a compelling way whilst working as a self-contained story with its own themes and messages. Of course, the stellar score, iconic art style, brilliant performances, and the intrigue of the mystery genre all help, but these are mere coats of paint on a foundation. The commonality in every great story, from beloved children's books to literary classics, is a thematic cohesion and intentionality. On top of this, by shifting the focus from having a massively branching narrative to having the choices be more about characterizing Bigby helps to get a player immersed. It makes Bigby a character that they truly understand the motives of, and that makes it all the more frustrating and dynamic at the final trial when all your choices are laid bare from perspectives that aren't your own. Having your choices twisted and turned against you regardless of intention when you're encouraged to be so immersed in them only helps to sell the Crooked Man as this horrifyingly manipulative villain. This focus on choice of characterization rather than choice of narrative is strong for a first playthrough, and I will defend there being minimal delineation from the murder mystery as a plot. However, I will say that there being so many correct and incorrect choices in some instances is poor and especially noticeable on repeat playthroughs. Despite every single character in this game being based on a fairy tale, these characters are so realised and far from being generic tropes. In fact, all of them having their origin in folklore helps to develop their characters. Some of them are wallowing in their lost glory, some wishing to uphold facades of what they once were, and some wanting to actively change to fit their new circumstances, for the worse or for the better. On top of this, players with an interest in myths and folklore get lots of fun little references and even slight foreshadowing through understanding of these characters' original stories and speculating about how they might play out in our world. This extremely focused narrative, conveyed through such a believable and endearing cast of characters which features lovable heroes and detestable villains while still operating in a moral grey zone, really does sell the player on a murder mystery fairy tale. The Wolf Among Us brilliantly walks the line between the spectacle of myth and the grit of crime fiction, making it this delightful cocktail of camp and carnage. This is an interactive movie that puts player choice at the forefront, not through an overly branching story, but rather through letting them pilot the protagonist in whichever way they see fit, allowing them to interface with all the themes in any way. Do they want change? Do they want to wallow in the myth of the big bad wolf? Do they want Fabletown to become kinder and fairer? Or do they want to rule by force and fear? In the end, does any of this matter? By shifting the focus in choice from the narrative to the protagonist and then crafting this extremely focused title, Telltale crafted one of the best in the genre, a high that, in my opinion, they never hit again. There's a reason why fans are clamouring for Wolf Among Us Season 2, and whilst I do hope we eventually get it, I also hope the studio don't lose sight of what makes this title so brilliant. Interactive movie type games don't need to throw 10 trillion options at players, rather they should have a tightly written story, with clearly defined thematic underpinnings which the player can then interface with in any which way they see fit. I would rather there be a central problem with infinite ways to approach it than infinite problems with one defined approach. If there isn't a strongly stated theme, then the player is just faffing about in a nihilist sandbox, rather than actually engaging with their choices. Choices can't just change which track the story train goes down, they need to make the player feel like they're exploring one of the central tenets of the story in their own unique way. The Wolf Among Us does this brilliantly, and that's why it's one of my favourites. Okay, we answered the central point in the video, so that's about it from me. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you might as well subscribe,